But like, so I realise there's a few people streaming just now, so I'm not going to do this in a live stream format. And I also want to apologise if my volume is a bit dodgy. It's just this laptop. I apologise for that. I've actually got a new microphone, and this laptop it won't even register it. So I'm stuck with this laptop that seems to be getting proceedingly worse, in truth. But there's nothing I can do about it. Alright, not made of money. That said, this is the second webinar from the Building Racial Literacy Programme. Scottish Government funded, of course, predicated on the back of their pledge for an anti-racist curriculum reformation, or reform even. And it's just interesting to see and listen to how these people operate, because at the end of the day, the reality of the matter is that these fringe individuals are no longer classified as fringe because they work with our governments. That's the reality of the matter. So, and I will not rest until this shit is, at the very bare minimum, brought to a wider audience. I mean, I'm running out of options, admittedly. It's exhaustive, but it has to be done. And I won't stop. As simple as that. Because at the end of the day, I can make jokes, I can laugh about it, but this toxicity, this venomous bile, is without question a bar hair away from being the status quo across our schools. In terms of this becoming teacher training, it'll be part of the teacher training. So anyway, enough of me. I just, as I say, apologise if my volume sounds a bit Pete Tong. I've tried everything, but it's just this laptop. Like, I miss my old setup.
I've just realised I've not introduced myself. My name is Melina Volodiev. I'm a lead specialist at Education Scotland, and I am the programme lead for the Building Racial Literacy programme. So it's my pleasure to be bringing to you this webinar that will be focusing on developing an understanding of the role of anti-racism and applying critical models for teaching and learning. And in groups, we'll get a chance to practice this anti-racist critical thinking to help you improve your curriculum design. And so just a bit of background before we think, actually, I introduce our presenters today, but the BRL webinar series is actually an extension of the Building Racial Literacy Programme, which is a new anti-racist professional learning programme. And we're bringing new collaborators onto these webinar series with Building Racial Literacy past participants to share some of their good practice and innovative ideas. We have another event coming up on Wednesday. If you've not already signed up, you can check it out on Eventbrite, The Journey of an Anti-Racist Educator. So today we are joined by two fantastic speakers. First of all, our new collaborator, Navin Govinder, who is a university lecturer in IT at Strathclyde and a member of the UK Literacy Association, as well as a member of the Anti-Racist Educator. We also are joined by Nuzhat Utmani, who's a primary school teacher and past participants from the Building Racial Literacy Programme, and she also founded the Global Citizenship Education.
Wait, let me edit this slightly so you can see who we're dealing with here. There we go. So, this woman here is this individual, and this guy here is that individual. I'm not going to pronounce their names, or I tend to anyway. But the Anti-Racist Educator, well, I've covered that a myriad of times before. It's the most cancerous website I have ever come across, and I say that wholeheartedly, sincerely, purely on the basis of not only who they're targeting, which is white children, but just the venom that they come away with. They are critical race theorists. That is their profession, that is their ideology, but they masquerade their true intentions under the banner of simply promoting anti-racism. And as for whatever, and global citizenship education, it's very strange how this all seems to tie in. Now, I've made a few videos on global citizenship education in the past, but the point being here, of course, that it all ties in. Then we've also got learning for sustainability education, etc., etc. All Scottish Government endorsed, all Scottish Government policy, may I add. Global citizenship, it's just fucking madness.
Website where she shares her anti-racist critical thinking model.
Critical thinking, yeah.
So we'll be learning a bit more about that very soon. Can I just remind participants who've just joined as well, we are recording this session, so if you do want your face to be on the recording, please make sure to mute and turn off your cameras. Now, I just want to give you a bit of background for the term racial literacy as well, because in the starter task...
Wait. This is why I get so angry with this stuff. Because this, as I said, was once upon a time something that was considered fringe. And we've gone from them being considered fringe to being individuals who work with our government, funded to some degree by our government, according to the Freedom of Information request pertaining to racial literacy or the Building Racial Literacy Programme. But look at this shit. Critical thinking without racial literacy. Understand that racial identity is a social construct. A consideration of intersectionality, and then in brackets the way racism intersects with other factors such as class and gender, understanding the impact of whiteness, the development of language to discuss race, racism and anti-racism, in brackets critical race theory, and then of course the bottom one being the ability to decode race and microaggressions. Fucking microaggressions, yeah, but whiteness. They want this shit incorporated into every single age bracket you can think of in an educational setting in Scotland. All the way down to early learning settings, which is nursery. In fact, according to the woman, and I know you can't see her face properly here, but this Melina Boot, according to her, according to them all, they've already got some of these anti-racist educators in early learning settings. Now, albeit they're not going to be sitting down to nursery children to talk explicitly about critical race theory, but the point remains the same, that this is a cancer. This is subversion. Anyway.
As we looked at what people understand by critical thinking, and you might think about what critical thinking means without literacy, racial literacy. So just to give you a very quick example of a practitioner who might be looking at their reading lists and think, right, I don't have any books that address racism and race. And
why does a teacher need to have any of these books? Why?
Need to think about diversifying my reading list. And one example, a practitioner chose to include the book A View from the Bridge, which takes place in the US in the 1960s, I believe, and all the characters are white, but they have undocumented migrants from Italy joining the US, and so that's the story about race, potentially. But
okay, I have no idea what this book is, but what relevancy does this have to Scotland? And it doesn't sound like she has much of a clue either, hence why she finished off her sentence there by potentially.
We see that if we take a possible definition of racial literacy, there's no real understanding of the impact of whiteness when all the characters are white, but also all the books in their library or their reading list are also white.
This is... I'm sorry that I keep pausing it, but this is what I'm saying. America back then, in that time period, was exponentially white. It was a white country. It was founded by white people. The forefathers, if you want to call them that. Was that the name? Aye. Spoke explicitly about white people. It was a white nation. It was the white utopia, the white dream. So naturally the libraries are going to be full to the brim of books based on the people that founded the country. It would make no sense for it to be anything else. But that's a problem to these people. And they use these sorts of examples to showcase how that is somehow implicit racism. We need to diversify the libraries. All the books are white. I wonder why they were white. Pretty sure where you originate from, Melina. Because you're not fucking Scottish. You're half French, half Indian. Pretty sure in India, the books in the Indian libraries, they won't be filled to the brim of Jacobites. They won't be filled to the brim of Swedish people. No, they'll be filled to the brim of Indians. The way that it should be. I wouldn't expect it to be any different.
Yes, absolutely. It's a play. So in the Building Racial Literacy program, we do think about reflecting on racial literacy as recognizing that racism is a contemporary issue. It's not just something in the past. It's also something that's relevant to Scotland, not just something that takes place in the US, for example. We also consider intersectionality, the importance of understanding racial identity as a social construct that can also be deconstructed, the development of language to discuss race, racism and anti-racism, and also the ability to decode race and racial microaggressions. So that's really based on the definition provided by Frans Wyndham's Twine. I'm now going to move on to Nuzhat's section of the webinar. So I'm just going to stop sharing my screen.
Oh, look at that.
And invite Nuzhat to share her slides.
Thanks, Melina. Let me just see if I can get this shared. Hi, can everybody see that okay?
Yeah, we can see it now. Thanks, Nuzhat.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Melina. Thanks, everyone. Hi there for joining us today in what is coming up to the last few days of term. So it's really, really good of you to give us all this time. So we don't have a huge amount of time, so I'm going to whiz through this then so that we can listen to Navin's very useful input as well. Like Melina said, my name is Nuzhat Lithwani. I'm a primary teacher in Glasgow City Council. I will be taking up an acting PT role in the new term, and I will be leading on all things equalities and sustainability. As part
Well, just very quickly, what she's about to play here, I'm pretty sure I covered before, and if so, it means that I can skip past this so the video doesn't need to be too long. Let me see. I think 2 seconds. Yeah, I think I can skip past this, but I'll leave the link to this video if you wish to see it in the description. But as I say, just for time constraints and whatnot, don't want the video being exponentially long, so I might skip past this unless this is different, but I've got a feeling it's the same thing. Well, as I skip forward a wee bit, it actually looks like it might very well be different, so fire on.
About, and I'm going to explain to you how we're using it within my school moving forward as well. Before we go into that, I think it's really important for us as teachers to understand why this work is so important to us as a profession. So it's not just about the fact that there has been a resurgence of this movement, or that our young people are asking difficult questions of us as their teachers. It's not just about that, but it is about the fact that it lies very much, I feel, at the centre of who we are and what it means to be a teacher in Scotland, and our need to promote social justice and equality through our society. and through the very valuable, obviously important work that we do as teachers and educators. The professional standards, you'll know, of course, were refreshed just last year, and it's really good to see that renewed emphasis in them. I especially think it's important to point out where they mention the need to challenge assumptions. That, to me, is not just about challenging assumptions that might exist within our pupils or in our classrooms, but it's also about challenging assumptions we might come across in staff rooms, in forums like this, and within our own practice. So it's only when we are brave enough to review and reflect on our own.
Oh, you're so brave, like so brave. You know, the irony being from this sort of ideology, albeit they think that they're being revolutionary, you know, and they're fighting the good fight. They're trying to right the wrongs of the past. They are fighting oppression, intersectionality-based oppression. But the white man, the whiteness is a problem, a rife issue in Scotland in particular, in this context. But yet they seem to be devoid of the capability to fathom for just a second that the way that they speak about white people, white children, white teenagers, white adults, white men in particular, but not limited to, is by its very nature, you know, very presumptuous. You know, you're stereotyping whites. You assume that whites live by some sort of religious dogma, you know, by a code of whiteness. Individuality went out the window a long time ago, for better or for worse. Probably I would argue for worse, because what's happening now is collectivization's taking place. But you're not allowed to collectivise as a white man or a white woman. Oh, no. You need to be browbeaten now. Yeah, you have to be treated like a lab rat by dickheads. And that's what they are, in truth. And look at this. The rights of the child. UN, United Nations Children's Rights Charter bullshit. Then we talk about the General Teaching Council of Scotland, teaching standards, which is effectively what every teacher in this country has to abide by, rules. And they speak about an inclusive society, or the development of and sustainability. All the buzzwords of a diverse and inclusive society. Promoting and endearing the rights, respecting culture. Yeah, just no ours the way. Challenging assumptions, biases and professional practice. And creating opportunities for learning to be transformative in terms of challenging assumptions and expanding worldviews.
Assumptions and biases that we bring for various reasons that change can come about. We also know that the UNCRC is going to be enshrined in law in Scotland at some point soon. And it's really important.
Which is a major red herring, by the way.
To think, even though we've talked a lot about our articles in various different ways in primaries and secondaries, we need to understand really that each article means something slightly different depending on the background and the kind of life experiences that a child or young people is going through. And we need to be really cognizant of what those barriers will be. For example, no discrimination in Article number 2. What does that mean if you're a white child growing up in Scotland, and what does it mean if you're a non-white child growing up in Scotland? It means very different things. So we also just want to clarify a difference here. We also hear a lot of conversation around diversifying our curriculum, which is definitely a good thing. I just want
diversifying our curriculum is most definitely a good thing, says the brown woman who was born in Liverpool, who moved to Scotland.
To point out that diversifying and applying anti-racist practice are not necessarily the same thing. We need to understand that diversifying the curriculum is referring more to the protected characteristics as set out in the Equalities Act 2010 and how we are representing people with those characteristics across our curriculum and our school system. Anti-racism, though, is the very specific movement to stand up against racism. There's a feeling that race equality...
Yeah. Despite the fact these individuals speak about a colourblind society, which of course Scotland for the most part was, that's problematic. Their words, not mine. They insist consistently that this is simply about standing up to racism. It's not. It's fucking not. It's critical race theory.
Equality gets a little bit diluted within the whole equality debate, but anti-racism is specifically about standing against these power imbalances that have been created as a result of our colonial history, and how those structures are still in place and causing barriers and
So
difficulties.
this is them redefining race yet again. Power, they speak of power dynamics, disparities, etc., etc. Scotland's got too many white people in positions of leadership, therefore that means that's indicative of a white supremacist society. Therefore we need to challenge that, tackle that. You know? That's what this is. This is what this boils down to. That's why they spend so much of their time complaining that there's too many white teachers in a Scottish... well, in Scotland. This just fucking drives me mad. I can't believe this shit's happening. Why the fuck's nobody talking about this, man?
Difficulty and discrimination for many communities within our very own society. Now, as a teacher on the ground, you know, I fully obviously understand that we go to many different types of professional learning and we hear lots of different things. But ultimately, we want to know, how do I take this information back to my classroom? How do I go and apply this with my pupils tomorrow? And this is how this critical thinking model that I've developed has come about, with me trying to think, how do I get us as teachers to really start to apply practical methods? Now, of course, there is anxiety. There is some hesitancy sometimes around applying anti-racist practice, because lots of people might feel that I don't have the lived experience, I don't have enough of those skills or the language or the knowledge, so how am I going to take this forward? So what I would say is that the model I'm going to show you is a really, really useful tool to help you critically think about what you do and why you do it, but it is not the be-all and end-all. You will need to still continue your journey of learning or unlearning, as we talk about, and then learning from different perspectives and approaches and understanding the history and the underlying concepts of...
No. What they mean by that is everything that you've been taught, everything that you believe to be reality, that's wrong, and you need to be re-educated. It's the equivalent of a re-education camp in many respects, because they use selective history, they use revisionist history, and they take parts from history to try and imply that there's some grandiose scheme that's created the societies that we currently live in today. Our white supremacist structures. Bear in mind though, this is targeted at teachers, with the end result being that our youth are targeted.
That kind of socially constructed element of racism and how it manifests in society. So even though this is a helpful tool to get us started, we need to keep up that journey of learning. So the tool in itself is basically a very simple framework of 6 questions. And the idea of it is for us to stop and think, well, why am I using this resource? You know, why do I normally use it? Is it because we've always taught this at this stage in primary, or we've always taught this as a topic in secondary?
Just to say, I have covered this section here in that video that I brought up earlier on. I've covered this.
You know, why is it we're doing that?
Briefly,
and whose perspective is that resource, that book, that image that you're using? Whose perspective is it from?
The implication being, just to summarise this so I can skip, is Eurocentrism. You know, we focus on the white heroes of World War II, and we don't speak about the Sikhs, the BAMEs from India and Africa. You know? Okay. You might have a point, an argument to a certain extent, but it's the insinuation that is sort of masqueraded within that point of contention. They try to insinuate that it's Eurocentrism and white supremacy.
The contribution of not just British India, but other allied forces that came from the colonised regions, colonised countries, then maybe we wouldn't have seen images like this happen in Britain. Maybe if we had valued the contribution of those people from the very beginning, there wouldn't have been this sense of othering for these communities that arrived here. Again, invited to come to this country to help.
But they weren't invited though. Another lie. They were not invited here. This is not true. Let him pass. You know, people in abundance back then were totally diametrically opposed to the so-called Windrush generation's ships arriving, right? If I remember correctly off the top of my head, there was somebody in Parliament at the time, I can't remember if it was the Prime Minister at that point in time, but they didn't even have a fucking clue that these boats were coming. On top of that, there was the Australian white immigration policy, you know, where they wanted, around about 1 million, quite often children, were sent to Australia just after World War II to help build up their population again. You know, take that into consideration. We're even going way before Enoch Powell ever rose to power to a certain extent and spoke avidly about the problems that were intensifying. People did not want them here. They spoke out against it consistently, and they were ignored. So don't hand me that they were invited here. No, they fucking were not invited here. This is my point. It's revisionist history.
Build the NHS, to help build our economy, to help build various things.
Yeah.
But we've continued with this feeling of othering these communities. Some might argue we don't see these images as much now, but here we are in 2022 having these conversations. So clearly...
Exactly, you don't see it now, do you? No, you don't, because we've ended up being what would be considered to a certain extent a colourblind society, and that is problematic. Your words, no mine.
The problems haven't gone away. Who does that impact on then?
Oh, I wonder.
Of course it impacts on children like me. When I was little, learning about World War II, and never heard about these contributions from other parts of the world. When things like Remembrance Day happened, you never see people that look like you, that come from communities that you are from, and you start to feel, well, maybe it's not really to do with us. You know, you'll join in, but you don't feel a part of it. So it's definitely about representation and adding value and pride to children and young people who are from different parts of the world who should have also been valued. But I would suggest it impacts on every child and young person, because we are robbing them of the full history, and we are robbing them of that knowledge without providing them the full picture and only taking selected bits of information to promote a certain narrative.
Oh, the irony. The irony, man.
Love maps, mainly because, yes, in some classrooms, so in social studies or in geography, you use them as part of the curriculum, but maps are also incredibly everyday texts. There isn't a school that I've been to that doesn't have a map or a range of maps of some sort. But revealing that they're constructed is a really helpful critical activity in unpacking, well, hold on, these taken for granted texts, that the one that we see before us, the Mercator projection, appears in school atlases and textbooks as giant wall posters, and are sometimes, even if they're not used specifically, just take up space in a lot of schools. But unpacking the Mercator projection helps us understand, well, some choices have been made by cartographers, by map designers. So when you move from a 3D object into a 2D object, you have to make certain choices about what parts of that image get distorted and what remains accurate. The Mercator projection maintains relative shape, but distorts relative size. So when we look at this is not a true reflection of the size of each of the continents, although their shape is accurate. When you change those decisions, so the Gall-Peter projection then came out and revealed, well, hold on, if you...
Who gets misrepresented? I'm sorry, I can't take this shit. I'm sorry, this is just fucking... These people are crackpots. And they're Scottish government funded. I mean, come on. Oh, it must be racism. Must be white supremacy because of a quote-unquote fucking atlas map misrepresentation. Ah, peace.